I have to be really careful because I used to kind of say, how do you know it's a Tuesday? Because there's another mass shooting in America. Because it was something that happened every day. In fact, we're going to get into the stats at the moment, and we're going to be showing you how at the moment they're averaging more than one mass shooting a day. We're going to go through this and have a look at a few clips of things that have happened, but we're going to start with basically a summary of what happened in Uvalde. And this is the news report that came out. Now, this news report is slightly wrong because it talks about 14 children, and tragically there's more than that. But I want us to set it up to have a look at what happened. Here is some of their initial reporting around the mass shooting in the US today.
He shot and killed horrifically, incomprehensibly, 14 students and killed a teacher.
Police say just before noon, a gunman walked into Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, and started shooting.
The shooter was Salvador Romas, an 18-year-old male who resided in Uvalde. It's believed that he abandoned his vehicle and entered into the Robb Elementary School in Uvalde with a handgun, and he may have also had a rifle.
Abbott says the gunman was a senior at a nearby high school, and he shot his grandmother before entering the elementary. Within minutes, heavily armed police rushed to the scene and confronted the shooter.
Mr. Romas, the shooter, he himself is deceased.
13 children were transported to the hospital for treatment. Witnesses say frantic parents rushed to the school. 2 victims, a child and an adult, were flown to San Antonio Hospital.
This school has children that are in 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade.
CBS News has also learned that multiple Border Patrol agents responded to the school shooting. One CBP agent has been shot in the head. That agent is at a local hospital receiving medical treatment and remains in stable condition.
We do want to keep all their families in their prayers. I hope you do as well. And we also want to respect the privacy of the family.
This shooting comes a little over a week after 10 people were killed in a mass shooting at a Buffalo supermarket. Police in Uvalde say a motive is unknown at this time, and the investigation is ongoing.
The suspect did act alone during this heinous crime.
So there's the story as we knew it at that time. I wanted to talk to a couple of things, and I've got some clips here, but I'll stop as we're going through them 2 or 3 times, guys, and give you guys a chance to respond to anything you want to say. So the Texas Governor, Greg Abbott, was there talking about incomprehensibly this has happened. There is a lot of criticism being put towards him at the moment, and other Republican lawmakers go, well, we can comprehend how this happens by what you guys have done to the gun laws more so over the last few years and decades. One of the criticisms that are coming towards Greg Abbott at the moment is, so I'll read this part for you from this article. Texas Governor Greg Abbott and other state lawmakers have weakened Texas gun laws in recent years, even after deadly shootings at a Walmart in El Paso, a high school in Santa Fe, and a church in Sutherland Springs. Abbott signed a law last year that allows Texans to carry handguns without a license, so-called permitless carry, before the law went into effect in September. Texans need to be licensed, fingerprinted, and trained. Earlier in 2015, Texas passed a law permitting those with concealed handgun licenses to carry a concealed weapon on a college campus. One lawmaker wanted to extend that measure to public schools. And before I take, I guess, the first break for you guys to respond, I wanted people to see in the US what's been going on in 2022. As sad as this sounds, the reason I just refreshed this is the last time I refreshed it, there'd been a new shooting. So at the moment, mass shootings in the US in 2020, number 213. This is day 145 of 2022, and they have had 213 mass shootings. Anyone like to jump in now? You're more than welcome.
I think that I have to say I'm so unfortunately used to news like that from the States, but I was particularly moved today because I think it's the fact that it is a primary school just adds a completely different layer. So we've seen this in the States for a really long time. And the logic always is in states like Texas, but also other states who've got quite lax gun laws, is that guns don't kill people, people kill people. So it really is not about having guns in circulation, is that people who want to kill people will find a way to kill people. That's the logic. But the reality is that it is much easier to kill people when you have access to guns. It's also much easier for you to have an accident that might not be planned and ends in death or harm for other people with these gun laws. But it's been kind of politically framed in a way as tied to inherently American notions of freedom under their constitution, so that guns are no longer just about this particular item that you can hold, that it becomes this right that's attached to you and what that means as Americans, right? Like this notion of American patriotism. And that's been done over time. Because when people talked about you having the right to a armed militia, I think is what the wording is, was effectively you as a population have a right to a group to defend you with arms against, whatever enemy that you might.
No, it's against the government, a well-armed
Yeah.
militia. So
You
it's
know,
against a
like
tyrannical government.
I think that's where it went, and now
Yeah.
it's kind of been translated. You as an individual have a right to carry a pistol into Walmart. Not only that, you as an individual you should have 16 semi-automatic rifles in your cupboard at home, which doesn't happen overnight, right? Like this culture of normalization of gun possession and tying any form of gun control to a restriction of freedom is a political process. And I think it kind of ties into the conversation we had before, because it is inherently political, and it's created a culture in which violence is really normalized. And I say normalized not only because people think it's okay to unleash violence on other people. It's become normalized to wake up to news like that. And even for us as people who are really, removed from that context, we look at that and it doesn't even have that much of a shock value because it happens so often now.
Yeah. It's Tuesday.
And the question then is not only how do you change gun laws, how do you create a massive culture shift? Because this is not only just now restricting the gun laws. There's more guns than people in the United States.
Yep.
And that is not something that is going to be reversible overnight or even within, I think, the next few years, right? There's so many guns in circulation that I think people don't even grasp the extent of the harm that can cause. And we're not talking of hunting rifles, because I think sometimes people confuse that in the New Zealand context, because people associate guns with, oh, you have a gun because you live on a farm, or you have a gun when you're going hunting. No, we're talking about private people have semi-automatic rifles, but also a 16-year-old can carry a pistol, right? Depending on where you live and the way you accessing buying them and the consequences for that is just, it's a whole different system. And the culture shift is the one that I think I find is the biggest challenge, right? Like, I think here people have a fear of, you send your kid to school and you think about what are the biggest threats. You think about traffic, and I kind of joke about that in New Zealand. I'm like, oh, there's not a single predator. If I get lost in the woods, it's, like there's always a stream and most things you can eat without them killing you. It's quite hard here. And I think the reality of having lived in the United States is that I would go for runs and I would be really afraid to run in areas that didn't have a sidewalk, because I thought if I step onto somebody's lawns, understand your ground laws, they could shoot me. Right? They could shoot me, and nobody, like no family they couldn't do anything about it because people would be in their right to shoot you.
Yeah. Hey, we'll keep going, David. If you've got something to add in, how about you jump in after this next couple of clips, because we want to hear your thoughts as well. So the Prime Minister has commented on this. She went on Colbert. I believe it's on TV and television in New Zealand later tonight. But Stephen Colbert asked her, when we had the Christchurch massacre, how did you just get rid of the guns? How did you how did that work in your culture? And the Prime Minister answered him today.
Why New Zealand was able to do that when we can't pass so much as universal background checks for people with history of mental illness or violent behavior, even though 91% of Americans approve that, want that, on both sides of the aisle. How did you get that done, or how did you New Zealanders get that done? Because I know it was general consensus.
Well, I can only speak to our experience in New Zealand, but when I watch from afar and see events such as those today, I think of them not as a politician. I see them just as a mother, and I'm so sorry for what has happened here. And then I think about what happened to us, and all I can reflect is we are a very pragmatic people. When we saw something like that happen, everyone said never again. And so then it was incumbent on us as politicians to respond to that. Now, we have legitimate needs for guns in our country for things like pest control and to protect our biodiversity, but you don't need a military-style semi-automatic weapon to do that. And so we got rid of them.
And so what are the results of that? Does it feel like a less free country to anyone down there? Has there been any sort of backlash for this having happened?
So we had a buyback scheme. You know, people had legitimately and legally gone out and purchased these weapons, and we'd changed the laws. So in fairness, we said, well, we will buy them back, and then we will destroy them. And so that is what we did. Now, we still have work to do. You know, there are still obviously guns that are misused in New Zealand, and so I won't sit here and say that our system is perfect, but we saw something that wasn't right and we acted on it, and I can only speak to that experience.
And she mentioned a buyback. Completely didn't know this. I tweeted out this afternoon something, and was I being a bit pithy or was I making a point? I don't know, but I tweeted out this afternoon, if people like Elon Musk really wanted to affect a change in the US, how about he pledges Twitter money, $45 billion, or about a fifth of his wealth, to getting guns off the street? $1,000 a gun would buyback scheme would get 45 million guns out of circulation. And yes, there are between 300 and 400 million guns in America, but you know, it would be a start. And I know that I'm grasping at straws there, but it's like, could it be something? David, do you want to jump in?
I was just going to say in response to that, you know, it ultimately it needs legislation, and legislation comes from political parties and political, you know, and governments and whatnot, and those entities are inherently followers rather than leaders. You know, the whole world's admiring, you know, what Jacinda did about, you know, after the mosque massacre in Otautahi, but it wasn't very politically courageous for her to do that, because that was a very unusual and shocking thing, and there isn't the same attitude to firearms ownership in New Zealand as there is in the US. So it was kind of easy. I mean, it was the right thing to do, and there's still grizzling people, and a lot of that is actually financed, I think, influenced by NRA money from the US, because they don't want this kind of thing to succeed in what it's doing. But, you know, if you look at Australia, they had a similar thing with the Port Arthur massacre, and they did it, and similar to us, they you know, it worked. It got those weapons denormalized and decommissioned. And, you know, touch wood, there hasn't been another thing quite like that. But I think the difficulty in the US is that there seems to be no political room for a president or a Congress or a Senate to get some political mileage out of grasping the nettle and addressing this issue. I was surprised that he said, did I hear him right, that he said 91% of Americans want background checks?
And we're going to look at that.
I'm confused then. So, I mean, that seems like, you know, that seems first base. Why hasn't that happened?
I mean, but I think his question of, and I know like he asked that in a you know, kind of like tongue-in-cheek way, and is it now a less free country? Right? Is it now a less free country? And as that's what I was saying, is that this notion of gun ownership has been so intrinsically tied to this notion of freedom that you can't have the conversation about restrictions on gun ownership without having a conversation around restricting freedom, which is a flawed conversation, because, you know, your right to bear arms should not outweigh the right of somebody else to be safe. Which, and then of course there's the I think when we talk about legislation, we can't not talk about the arms industry. We're talking about one of the most financially profitable industries on earth today. So there is a lot of money that is made in the arms trade. So when we're talking about changing this, we're literally telling people we don't want you to make profit. And that's a huge industry here. That's not just here, like around the world. The arms industry is a very, very big industry that keeps producing guns. And even if we don't use them, they're pumped into other countries and cause harm.
I also found myself often feeling uneasy or maybe a bit suspicious of the intense focus in the American context and the New Zealand context after the terrorist attacks in Christchurch, is that the intense focus on guns themselves and gun legislation. I was always a little bit suspicious of that, right? It seemed to be that the nation forgot that 51 worshippers had been killed, right? Because of, a white supremacist terrorist who, learnt those ideas from somewhere, right? From the society that he lives in. I see this with the Democrats in America as well, is that, they will talk about the gun legislation to the expense of other things.
And I mean, this comes, what is it, a couple of days after the shooting in Buffalo, which was a white supremacist shooting, which I think people also kind of hesitate describing as that, but it was clearly targeting and I think it was a Black community. So they, I think it's important to talk about guns. I don't want to dismiss that, because I think that's an important conversation to have. But I think if we want to think about the shooting in Christchurch and the one in Buffalo and many others in the US and elsewhere, there's another conversation as well, right? Like this is there's another broader conversation of white supremacy, for example.
And on some level, this actually ties back to the previous conversation we've been having about media bias and what the media's got to say. Because the Buffalo shooting, for example, the shooter was espousing replacement theory, which Tucker Carlson has been talking about for months and months and months, to a point where he's been so blatant about it, he's now trying to back away from it because he's been tied to the Buffalo shooting quite easily, actually. But we've talked about legislation, we've talked about like a change through government. I'm going to play this as well. Now, I'm playing this for two reasons. One is it's an impassioned plea from a politician. However, I'm going to show you everybody afterwards that don't get this twisted. This is not just a Republican issue, all right? This has been a Democrat and a Republican issue for a long time. And whilst this is a Democrat senator, the Democrats in Senate have done very little about this as well. Maybe they haven't been able to get it through because the Republicans have blocked, but they have not pushed this like they should have. So we have this underpinning and this swell right now because of this horrific event. But it's really, I think it's really fair to go, this is not just on the Republicans. In saying that, this is the senator who was also the senator for the area, I think it's Connecticut, where Sandy Hook was. So he knows about elementary school shooting in his community. And this is what he shared today. This is like 4 or 5 minutes. I want to play the whole thing. But this is what he said on the floor today.
Mr. President, there are 14 kids dead in an elementary school in Texas right now. What are we doing? What are we doing? Just days after a shooter walked into a grocery store to gun down African American patrons, we have another Sandy Hook on our hands. What are we doing? There have been more mass shootings than days in the year. Our kids are living in fear every single time they set foot in a classroom because they think they're going to be next. What are we doing? Why do you spend all this time running for the United States Senate? Why do you go through all the hassle of getting this job, of putting yourself in a position of authority, if your answer is that as this slaughter increases, as our kids run for their lives, we do nothing? What are we doing? Why are you here? If not to solve a problem as existential as this. This isn't inevitable. These kids weren't unlucky. This only happens in this country and nowhere else. Nowhere else do little kids go to school thinking that they might be shot that day. Nowhere else do parents have to talk to their kids, as I have had to do, about why they got locked into a bathroom and told to be quiet for 5 minutes just in case a bad man entered that building. Nowhere else does that happen except here in the United States of America, and it is a choice. It is our choice to let it continue. What are we doing? In Sandy Hook Elementary School, after those kids came back into those classrooms, they had to adopt a practice in which there would be a safe word that the kids would say if they started to get thoughts in their brain about what they saw that day. If they started to get nightmares during the day, reliving stepping over their classmates' bodies as they tried to flee the school. In one classroom, that word was monkey. And over and over and over through the day, kids would stand up and yell, monkey. And a teacher or a paraprofessional would have to go over to that kid, take them out of the classroom, talk to them about what they had seen, work them through their issues. Sandy Hook will never, ever be the same. This community in Texas will never, ever be the same. Why? Why are we here? If not to try to make sure that fewer schools and fewer communities go through what Sandy Hook has gone through, what Uvalde is going through. Our heart is breaking for these families. Every ounce of love and thoughts and prayers we can send, we are sending. But I'm here on this floor to beg, to literally get down on my hands and knees and beg my colleagues. Find a path forward here. Work with us to find a way to pass laws that make this less likely. I understand my Republican colleagues will not agree to everything that I may support, but there is a common denominator that we can find. There is a place where we can achieve agreement that may not guarantee that America never, ever again sees a mass shooting, that may not overnight cut in half the number of murders that happen in America. It will not solve the problem of American violence by itself, but by doing something, we at least stop sending this quiet message of endorsement to these killers whose brains are breaking, who see the highest levels of government doing nothing, shooting after shooting. What are we doing? Why are we here? What are we doing?
And since he made that plea, it's been released that the Democrats are going to move quickly to clear the way for votes on legislation to strengthen background checks. Now, I read in that they're going to clear the way. That means they could have cleared the way yesterday, or a week ago, or a month ago, or a year ago. And it shocked me when I looked for some information about this to actually see a story about that 91% that you asked about, David, go back to 2013. So since 2013, this has been in the Senate on some level. Obama, Trump, Biden. It's not necessarily don't point the finger just at the Republicans. They might be blocking it. They may be the hurdle, but this is not a situation just to lay at the feet of them. This is a governmental, institutional, have no will to get this done. This has been around for a long time, this desire by the public in America. Mahdis, you said something really interesting. It wasn't brave for Jacinda to make that decision because we all wanted it. America wants this. This is David, not a brave decision for the politicians.
This is a background check. I think this is, we need to be really careful because when we look at the data of the mass shootings, Also, a significant number of the people who use those guns are people who got them legally and would have passed the background check. So I think let's not be fooled that all shootings happen by people who would have not gone.
I don't think they're saying that, though. I mean, I think what they're saying is they need to move forward somewhere. They need to make some progress somewhere.
But the conversation here is this is very, very, very low hanging fruit.
I agree, and they still can't get that. The low hanging fruit.
No.
That's the point. They can't even get that.
What would be the argument against background checks? I mean, you put the counterfactual there, like, so people are saying that it would be unreasonable and unfair and irrational and unconstitutional that if somebody turns up wanting to buy an automatic weapon, you might ask a few questions and find out some stuff about them. Well, I mean, what is that?
Yeah.
Hey, I've got one more clip I want to play. It's a couple of minutes, and then we can wrap up. Thanks, you guys, for sticking around. You can cut out at any stage if you feel like you need to. But I got one more clip, and I'm prompted by this because I'm a huge basketball fan. A lot of people will have seen this, and there's conference finals going on in America at the moment, and there is a host on Fox News called Laura Ingraham, and once when LeBron James spoke out, she told him on her show to shut up and dribble. She literally said that you shouldn't be speaking out, you shouldn't be sharing your views, you should shut up and dribble. So today, Steve Kerr, who was I'm a huge fan of Steve Kerr because he was a part of that Chicago Bulls era in the 1990s with Michael Jordan to win all those championships. He's now coaching the Golden State Warriors. And when they finished practice, they'd finished practice for the day, getting ready for a game. Then the shooting happened. Then they had the media scrum prior to the game. And I want to play the 2 minutes of his conversation to the reporters on game day. This is what he said today.
I'm not going to talk about basketball. Nothing's happened with our team in the last 6 hours. We're going to start the same way tonight. Any basketball questions don't matter. Since we left shoot-around, 14 children were killed 400 miles from here, and a teacher. And in the last 10 days, we've had elderly black people killed in a supermarket in Buffalo. We've had Asian churchgoers killed in Southern California, and now we have children murdered at school. When are we going to do something? I'm tired. I'm so tired of getting up here and offering condolences to the devastated families that are out there. I'm so tired of I'm sorry. I'm tired of the moments of silence. Enough. There's 50 senators right now who refuse to vote on H.R. 8, which is a background check rule that the House passed a couple of years ago. It's been sitting there for 2 years. And there's a reason they won't vote on it, to hold on to power. So I ask you, Mitch McConnell, I ask all of you senators who refuse to do anything about the violence and school shootings and supermarket shootings, I ask you, are you going to put your own desire for power ahead of the lives of our children and our elderly and our churchgoers? Because that's what it looks like. It's what we do every week. So I'm fed up. I've had enough. We're going to play the game tonight, but I want every person here, every person listening to this to think about your own child or grandchild or mother or father or sister, brother. How would you feel if this happened to you today? We can't get numb to this. We can't sit here and just read about it and go, well, let's have a moment of silence. Yeah, go Dubs, you know. Come on, Mavs, let's go. That's what we're going to do. We're going to go play a basketball game. And 50 senators in Washington are going to hold us hostage. Do you realize that 90% of Americans, regardless of political party, want background check, universal background check? 90% of us, we are being held hostage by 50 senators in Washington who refuse to even put it to a vote, despite what we, the American people, want. They won't vote on it because they want to hold on to their own power. It's pathetic. I've had enough.
Wow.
So there you go. Yeah. And look, I don't know if this is a little bit overly dramatic for me. I don't want it to be. But everyone, Jacinda was talking about she's thinking like a mother tonight. Steve Kerr is talking about he's just thinking about kids and grandkids and all those people out there. I mean, I've got kids who are past this age, but I wanted today to have a look, and I thought about the kids that are this age, and this is nothing to do with the school, but this is a 3rd grade class. This is the size of the children we're talking about. Right, this is not the class. I'm not putting up pictures of images, but this is a public photo of a 3rd grade class in America. It was grades 2 to 4. This is the size of the little human beings that we're talking about. And if you can't do what I can do and think about my kids when they were 7 or 8, then you can look at this photo. Make it clear again, this is not the kids. I just wanted a representation of how little these people are. Anyone else?
I mean, we know what my stance is on gun violence. I connect this to a broader issue. I don't think anybody deserves their life being cut short through gun violence, whether that is through a mass shooting of an individual, through conflict or warfare, or so I think that's something I think about too. I feel it shouldn't be so difficult for us to have empathy with who is not us. And it shouldn't take people to look like us for them to have empathy with them. It shouldn't have to be our child. It shouldn't have to be our parent or our great parent, our grandparent. We should have a capacity to have empathy for humans. And I've been thinking about that quite a lot. And I think in the aftermath of the, what's going on in the Ukraine, and always thinking about what's happening in Palestine, and thinking about, also Afghanistan. And I always think this is the sheer violence that we see sometimes that happens as a shock effect for us when it happens here or in our backyard. But to remember that for people, that's their everyday reality. And because we can't see them, or because they don't look like us and we can relate to them, we somehow don't feel their pain. So I think that's what I'd seen that clip earlier on social media. And I thought, like, we're appealing to people to say, why is it so hard for you? Why is it so hard for you to recognize the human damage that happens, right?
I agree, and that's why I find the sort of words that are used, tragedy and a minute's silence and so on, they're just, in that context, it's a tragedy if there's a bus crash, if a rock falls off a mountain and pushes a bus down a ravine and kids die. That's a tragedy. But this is way, way, way bigger than a tragedy. And I mean, seriously, the 213 this year. I mean, what happened for 209 and 206 and 184, and I mean that is that people saying don't be numb to it, but that is so shockingly frequent, so shockingly frequent. And look at the kid was 18 or something, like the one in Buffalo, I think, was similar kind of age. I mean, what kind of society is generating people who do that? It isn't just that they've got access. Having access to weapons makes a big difference. If they went in with a knife, they might kill a few people. They wouldn't kill so many. But what is it that's generating that level of violence and anger amongst men? Was it exclusively men? If it's not, it's pretty much